exercise judgment right now.
Because we have...
In the name of Jesus.
Oh, thank you, Jesus.
Standing in the office of the prophet of God.
In recent news, Kenneth Copeland, the seemingly great orator who inspired millions, has lived a life in the spotlight for decades, but now at 88, he is breaking his silence in a way no one expected. The truth he is revealing, shocking the entire gospel community and beyond. What can a beloved gospel legend say? After all these years, the answers may change your view of him forever. Kenneth Copeland, a life of prosperity and preaching. Kenneth Copeland has spent decades building one of the most recognizable names in televangelism, amassing a vast following and an empire centered around faith, prosperity, and the belief that divine blessings can lead to wealth. As the founder of Kenneth Copeland Ministries, KCM, he became a major figure in the prosperity gospel movement, preaching that faith in God could bring both spiritual fulfillment and financial success. His fiery sermons, best-selling books, and large-scale revival events made him a household name in Christian circles. Copeland's television broadcasts reached millions worldwide, delivering messages of hope, financial breakthrough, and unwavering faith. He built a multi-million-dollar ministry, complete with private jets, luxurious properties, and a massive congregation that admired his success as proof of God's favor. However, alongside his influence and wealth came controversy, as critics questioned his extravagant lifestyle and the financial burdens placed on his devoted followers.
The main reason is because of the need. If I flew commercial, I'd have to stop 65% of what I'm doing.
The on-stage incident that shocked the Christian world. Kenneth Copeland was no stranger to controversy, but no one could have predicted the shocking incident that took place on stage that night. It was supposed to be just another powerful sermon, another evening filled with fiery preaching, gospel music, and the unwavering message of faith that had defined his career for decades. Thousands of devoted followers had gathered, expecting to be uplifted by the words of a man who had built one of the most powerful ministries in modern history. But what happened instead left the audience stunned, the media in a frenzy, and Copeland's entire legacy hanging in the balance. The night started as usual. Copeland took the stage, his booming voice filling the massive auditorium. He spoke about faith, prosperity, and the divine blessings that awaited those who remained true to God. The crowd responded with passionate amens and applause, their energy mirroring his enthusiasm. As the evening progressed, the atmosphere grew even more electric, with gospel music swelling and the preacher feeding off the excitement of his audience. And then, in a moment that no one saw coming, everything changed. According to multiple eyewitnesses, Copeland turned to a fellow minister on stage, a man who had been standing beside him throughout the sermon, and did something completely unexpected. He leaned in, and before the audience could fully process what was happening, he kissed the man. It wasn't a casual embrace or a simple gesture of brotherly love. It was, as some described, an intimate moment that sent a wave of shock through the crowd. For a split second, the entire auditorium fell silent. Then came the gasps, the murmurs, the frantic glances exchanged between audience members. Some sat frozen in disbelief, while others looked around, waiting for some kind of explanation. At first, people thought they had misunderstood what they had just witnessed. Maybe it was a moment of deep spiritual connection. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. But as whispers spread across the venue and cell phones were pulled out to capture the moment, the reality began to sink in. Kenneth Copeland, the televangelist who had spent years preaching about traditional values, had just been caught in an act that directly contradicted everything his followers had been taught to believe. The response from the stage was almost immediate. The choir, seemingly sensing the tension in the air, tried to keep the energy flowing with another round of uplifting gospel music. But it was clear that something was wrong. Copeland himself looked momentarily stunned, as if he hadn't expected the weight of the moment to hit so quickly. The other ministers on stage exchanged nervous glances, some shifting uncomfortably, while others whispered to one another. And then, just as quickly as it had happened, Copeland regained his composure. He turned back to the audience, forced a smile, and continued speaking as if nothing had happened. But the damage had already been done. Within minutes, the internet exploded with reactions. Videos of the moment began circulating on social media, spreading like wildfire across platforms. People dissected the footage frame by frame, analyzing every detail, every movement, every expression. Was it a misunderstanding? Was it a sign of something deeper? Was there more to Kenneth Copeland's life than he had ever let on? The reactions were swift and divided. His most loyal supporters immediately rushed to his defense, arguing that the moment had been taken out of context. It was just a gesture of brotherly love, some claimed. The media is twisting this to attack a man of God, others insisted. But not everyone was convinced. For many, this wasn't just a simple misunderstanding. It was a revelation. A contradiction too big to ignore, and as more people watched the footage, the theories began to emerge. Some believed that Copeland had simply made a mistake in the heat of the moment. Perhaps he had been caught up in the energy of the service, overcome with emotion, and acted impulsively. But others weren't so sure. They pointed to his reaction afterward, the way he had hesitated, the way the other ministers on stage had reacted, the sheer awkwardness that followed. If it was nothing, people asked, then why did it feel like such a big deal? As the controversy grew, Copeland's ministry scrambled to respond. Within hours, an official statement was released, claiming that the incident had been misinterpreted and that Copeland was simply expressing his appreciation for a fellow preacher. The statement urged the public not to jump to conclusions and insisted that Copeland remained committed to his faith and teachings. But the statement only seemed to fuel the fire. If it was nothing, why did they feel the need to address it so quickly? If it was innocent, why was there such an effort to control the narrative? Soon, more voices joined the conversation. Other televangelists and Christian leaders weighed in, with some openly defending Copeland while others remained conspicuously silent. Some called for understanding, urging people not to judge too quickly, while others questioned whether this moment was revealing something that had been hidden for years. "This isn't about a single moment," one commentator said. "This is about what it represents." As the days went on, speculation only intensified. Old interviews, past sermons, and even Copeland's personal life were now being re-examined under a new lens. People began asking whether there had ever been subtle hints that something like this was possible. Had there been moments in his career that, in hindsight, could be seen as clues? Had Copeland spent years hiding a part of himself that he was too afraid to reveal? For Copeland's critics, the incident became proof of what they had always suspected, that his public persona was carefully crafted, that the image he had built was more about power than truth. "This is what happens when you create an empire built on appearances," one critic wrote. "Eventually, the mask slips." Meanwhile, within his own ministry, there were whispers of internal conflict. Some longtime supporters reportedly felt betrayed, struggling to reconcile the man they had followed for years with the footage they had seen. Others doubled down in their support, arguing that no matter what had happened, Copeland was still a man of God, still their leader, still the voice they trusted. But as much as his followers debated, analyzed, and theorized, one thing became clear: this moment had changed everything. Kenneth Copeland, a man who had built his career on absolute certainty, now found himself at the center of a question that no one could ignore. What really happened that night? And more importantly, why did it feel like it was only the beginning? The fallout, a ministry on the brink of a scandal. Kenneth Copeland had spent decades building an empire, one of the most powerful ministries in the world, reaching millions with his fiery sermons, best-selling books, and relentless preaching of the prosperity gospel. But now, everything he had built stood on the brink of collapse. The shocking onstage incident had sent shockwaves through the Christian community, leaving his supporters divided, his critics emboldened, and his ministry scrambling to control the narrative. What was supposed to be another routine sermon had turned into the most controversial moment of his career, and the fallout was just beginning. The initial response from his ministry was swift, but it did little to quell the storm. A carefully worded statement was released, insisting that the moment had been misinterpreted and taken out of context. It urged the public not to be deceived by misleading narratives and assured that Kenneth Copeland remained as devoted to his faith as ever. But the statement did not have the calming effect they had hoped for. Instead, it only fueled further speculation. If it was nothing, why was there such an urgent need to explain it away? If there was no real controversy, why did it feel like a crisis? Within hours, social media was flooded with theories, debates, and arguments. Some fans stood by Copeland, insisting that the entire scandal was a ploy by the media to bring down a man of God. They flooded comment sections with support, sharing Bible verses about standing firm in faith during trials and persecution. Others, however, weren't so convinced. They dissected the footage frame by frame, analyzing Copeland's body language, the expressions of those around him, and the immediate reaction of the audience. "Something about this doesn't sit right," one user wrote. "If it was just a simple gesture, why did it feel so off?" As the internet exploded with reactions, the media was quick to jump on the controversy. News outlets that had rarely covered religious leaders were now broadcasting segments on Kenneth Copeland's shocking moment, with pundits and analysts discussing the potential fallout. Talk shows invited experts on Christian leadership to weigh in, questioning whether Copeland's legacy could survive such a scandal. Some commentators pointed out the hypocrisy, noting that Copeland had spent years preaching about traditional values, yet now found himself at the center of a controversy that directly contradicted those teachings. Within his own organization, tensions were beginning to rise. Staff members and longtime associates were reportedly in disagreement about how to handle the situation. Some believed that the best course of action was to completely ignore the controversy and wait for it to blow over, arguing that engaging with the media would only make things worse. Others, however, felt that a more direct approach was needed, that Copeland himself should address the situation head-on, speaking to his followers in an honest and transparent manner. But that kind of response was risky. One wrong word, one misstep, and the entire ministry could crumble. Behind closed doors, Copeland's inner circle worked tirelessly to do damage control. Private meetings were held to discuss strategy, PR experts were brought in to craft the perfect messaging, and close allies within the church community were contacted to publicly defend him. But despite their efforts, cracks were beginning to show. Anonymous sources from within the ministry started leaking details to the press, revealing that the atmosphere inside Copeland's organization had grown tense and uncertain. "Nobody knows what to do," one insider reportedly told a journalist. "The first time in a long time, there's real fear about what comes next." As the controversy continued to unfold, more and more church leaders began to distance themselves from Copeland. Some pastors who had once stood alongside him at major events suddenly fell silent, avoiding any association with the scandal. Others made vague statements about staying true to biblical principles, without directly mentioning Copeland by name. It was clear that, for many, the situation had become too risky to be caught up in. Even within evangelical circles, where loyalty was often unwavering, the pressure was mounting. And then the donations began to slow. For a ministry as massive as Kenneth Copeland's, financial support was the lifeblood that kept everything running. His television broadcasts, mega-church services, and global outreach programs all relied on the continued generosity of his followers. But as the scandal grew, reports surfaced that donations were beginning to decline. Regular supporters were hesitant to give, unsure of what to make of the controversy. Some former donors publicly announced that they were pulling their support altogether, saying they could no longer stand behind a leader whose actions had raised so many questions. "I've tithed to Kenneth Copeland Ministries for over a decade," one former supporter wrote online. "But after this, I can't do it anymore." The financial strain only added to the growing pressure. Copeland's team knew they had to do something to regain control of the situation, to reassure followers that their leader was still the man they had always believed him to be. But as they scrambled for solutions, new problems began to arise. More old footage of Copeland's past sermons started circulating online, with critics pointing out statements that now seemed contradictory in light of the scandal. Every past comment about morality, every fiery sermon about righteousness, was now being scrutinized under a different lens. "How can we take him seriously now?" people asked. "How can he preach about truth when he won't even address his own actions?" The pressure wasn't just external. Inside his own ministry, staff members were reportedly starting to question the future. Some had dedicated their entire lives to Kenneth Copeland Ministries, but now uncertainty loomed. Could the ministry survive this? Would Copeland be able to recover, or was this the beginning of the end? Some employees allegedly began searching for new opportunities, sensing that things might never return to how they once were. And the more the rumors spread, the harder it became to silence them. For Kenneth Copeland himself, the weight of the scandal was undeniable. He had spent decades presenting himself as a man of unwavering faith, a leader who commanded respect and authority. But now, his credibility was being questioned in ways he had never experienced before. And the worst part? The questions weren't going away. Every attempt to move past the controversy only seemed to reignite it. Every effort to steer the conversation back to faith and prosperity was met with more skepticism. As the weeks went on, one thing became clear. This wasn't just a passing controversy. This was a defining moment, the kind of scandal that could reshape a legacy, that could permanently alter the way people saw Kenneth Copeland and everything he stood for. Would he emerge from it unscathed, or would this be the moment that finally shattered his empire? Only time would tell, but one thing was certain. The ministry was on the brink, and the world was watching. Kenneth Copeland's silence, the question that remains. Kenneth Copeland's silence in the wake of the controversy has only deepened the mystery surrounding him. For decades, he has been known for his commanding presence, his booming sermons, and his unwavering confidence. Whether he was preaching about prosperity, healing, or faith, he always had an answer. But now, when the world is demanding one, he has chosen to say nothing. And that silence speaks volumes. From the moment the scandal broke, people expected a response. His followers looked to him for reassurance, his critics waited for him to stumble, and the media anticipated a statement that would either confirm or deny the swirling rumors. But instead, there was nothing. No press conference, no social media post, not even a brief comment during one of his sermons. The man who had spent his life preaching about truth and faith had suddenly fallen silent, and that silence became the loudest part of the entire controversy. At first, many believed he was simply waiting for the right moment to speak. His supporters defended his silence, arguing that he was taking time to pray and seek guidance. A man of God doesn't react out of emotion, one follower wrote online, he waits for wisdom. But as days turned into weeks, and then weeks into months, patience began to wear thin. The longer Copeland refused to address the scandal, the more people began to wonder. Was there something he didn't want to say? Was his silence an admission of guilt? Or was it simply a strategy to let the storm pass? The lack of a response fueled countless theories. Some speculated that he was under immense pressure from those within his ministry, trying to craft the perfect message that would minimize damage. Others believed he was being advised to remain quiet, hoping that the controversy would die down on its own. And then there were those who suspected something far more sinister, that Copeland was staying silent because there was nothing he could say that wouldn't make things worse. Social media erupted with debates over what his silence truly meant. Supporters held on to the belief that he was simply above the drama, refusing to engage in gossip or lies. "The enemy wants to tear down great men of faith," one user posted. "Brother Copeland doesn't need to defend himself, God will do that for him." But critics weren't convinced. If this were truly a lie, he'd be shutting it down immediately, one commenter pointed out. "The fact that he won't say anything tells me all I need to know." Even within the Christian community, opinions were divided. Some pastors openly called for Copeland to address the issue, warning that his silence was doing more harm than good. Others chose to distance themselves, avoiding the topic altogether in fear that their own reputations might be tainted by association. It was becoming clear that this scandal wasn't just about Copeland. It was affecting the entire evangelical world. Meanwhile, Copeland's ministry continued on, operating as if nothing had changed. His scheduled appearances went on without mention of the controversy, his television programs remained focused on faith and prosperity, and his team worked tirelessly to keep things running smoothly. But beneath the surface, the cracks were starting to show. Attendance at some of his events reportedly began to decline, and donations, once the backbone of his empire, were rumored to be slowing. His ministry, which had always thrived on trust and loyalty, was now being overshadowed by doubt and suspicion. For many longtime supporters, the silence was painful. These were people who had followed Copeland for decades, who had built their spiritual lives around his teachings, who had given their hard-earned money to support his ministry. And now, when they needed answers, when they needed to know whether they could still trust him, they were met with nothing. Some remained faithful, choosing to believe in him no matter what, but others started asking hard questions. "I've defended him for years," one former supporter wrote, "but I can't keep defending someone who won't even defend himself." The media only added to the pressure, continuously highlighting his refusal to address the issue. News outlets that had once ignored Copeland were now dissecting every aspect of his ministry, pulling up old sermons, past controversies, and any detail that might add to the growing uncertainty. Reporters reached out for interviews, but Copeland's team refused to comment. The more he avoided the conversation, the bigger it became. Then came the rumors that he was planning a statement, one that would finally put the controversy to rest. Some sources claimed he was working with a crisis management team, preparing a carefully crafted response that would satisfy both his supporters and his critics. Others believed he was waiting for the perfect opportunity, perhaps during a major event, where he could control the narrative. But those rumors never turned into reality. No statement was made, no explanation given, just more silence. And that silence left the world with one lingering question: why? Why, after building an empire on the foundation of faith and truth, would Kenneth Copeland refuse to speak when it mattered most? Why would a man who had preached for decades about standing firm in the face of adversity choose to hide when the spotlight turned on him? Was it fear? Was it guilt? Or was it something else entirely? For now, no one knows. The only person who can answer that question is Kenneth Copeland himself, and until he does, the silence will continue to grow louder.